Yes, hello. Welcome to the Trails of History podcast. Today's guest is no guest. It's only me. It's only gonna be me. So hopefully I will talk a whole hour through it because the topic is going to be Operation Market Garden for this podcast episode. Sean is not here sadly because he has to work and we want to upload something. So next week's guest is gonna be way better than only me talking in front of the camera, to be fair. But so I am going to talk about what I'm going to talk about during this podcast is Operation Market Garden, my favorite operation of the Second World War. So I'm going to talk about the whole thing of Operation Market Garden, why Operation Market Garden, why the operation, how it started, how it went, and the topic, and that you also saw in the title, is the why it failed. Why did Operation Market Garden fail for the Allies, and was it a victory for the Germans? So we're going to talk about a lot of that. So I have some notes in front of me, but most of it I'm just going to say, out the top of my head. And hope it's going to go great. So normally this is the time to say, let's roll the intro.
This podcast is sponsored by us, Trails of History. Have you ever wanted to visit the Operation Market Garden battlefields? Well, here is your chance. Join us for a 3-day tour covering the key sites of the British 1st Airborne, the American 82nd Airborne Division, and Easy Company of the famous Band of Brothers series of the 101st Airborne Division. Explore Arnhem, Oosterbeek, Nijmegen, the crossroads where Easy Company fought, and Schoondelocht Farm. All brought to life by expert storytelling right where history happened. The tour runs from April 10th to April 12th, 2026. The tickets for the tour are now live. Go to trailsofhistory.com where you can buy your ticket. We are excited and hope to see you there on the battlefield with us.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
We went over and we crawled. If you stood up, you were dead.
Schulden tragen den deutschen Staat, das Deutsche Reich.
What's this for 5? This is Delta for 5-3.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Okay, Operation Market Garden. So Operation Market Garden, for people who are listening who don't know about it, well, probably everybody has heard about Operation Market Garden. It's the largest airborne operation in the whole history of mankind, literally, especially from the Second World War, but also from human history, because around 35,000 paratroopers jumped into the Netherlands to capture bridges over the rivers in the Netherlands. I'm going to explain to you why it happened and how it happened. But first, we need to understand the beginning of or the situation during the Second World War around 1944. So what happened, of course, in 1944, D-Day, 6th of June. The Allies came ashore into Normandy and they fought the Germans back, beaten them back as well. And eventually, the Germans completely collapsed, and the Allies could push through all the way to Belgium and to the south of the Netherlands. Then, of course, the Allies think that the Germans are completely beaten. That, we're going to roll over them and yada, yada, yada. But what the Germans sort of did, they withdrew back to the Siegfried Line, to the West Wall, what the Germans had built during the war, but also previous to the war. It's like a big defensive line in Germany, going from the Dutch border all the way down to the Swiss border. So the western half of France is literally cut off by a whole dragon's teeth type of bunker fortifications. I don't know how to say, defensive system of the Germans. The Germans were hiding behind that, but on the north or the south of the Netherlands, which the Germans also occupied, there was no Dragon's Teeth and no defenses. So eventually the Allies came up, well, when I say the Allies, Bernard Montgomery came up with a plan called Operation Market Garden. Previous to that, before we go to the actual operation, previous to Operation Market Garden, Bernard Montgomery and the Allies had, I think it was around 16 other different plans that either got cancelled because of the weather or got cancelled because the Allies already pushed through that area with the infantry. And Bernard Montgomery was trying his best to have a operation where he could use the 1st Airborne Division in. So after 16, I think 16, you cannot quote me on that to be fair, but it was a lot of operations that didn't go through and didn't eventually got the green light and were cancelled. Finally, Operation Comet was there. Comet was sort of the sister of Operation Market Garden. So they wanted to do Operation Comet, which is sort of the same, but instead of using 3 airborne divisions, what Operation Market Garden had, they would use 2 airborne divisions. But that Operation Comet eventually got cancelled, and then it turned into Operation Market Garden. So you have to paint this picture for yourself. Bernard Montgomery is asking Eisenhower every time, right? Hey, I want to use the 1st Airborne Division. This is a little bit casual what I'm saying right now, but it sort of comes to this, that Eisenhower got Montgomery all the time asking him like, hey, I want to use the 1st Airborne Division, this and this operation. Well, it got cancelled again, yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden, Operation Market Garden, a pretty ambitious airborne operation and pretty risky as well. So eventually, Montgomery convinced Eisenhower to go through with Operation Market Garden and give the green light. So now, before I continue that little story, I'm first going to explain you the plan of Operation Market Garden, so you have a little bit of a better visual of the whole operation. And then I'm going to say why eventually Eisenhower gave the green light. That was said in his memoirs after the war. And that then we'll start with the operation itself, with the execution of it. So first, I want to show you guys something. For the people who are listening on Spotify or cannot see the screen, I'm sorry, but I will sort of tell you what is happening on screen. There we go. So this footage I'm going to show you is part of a documentary I am working on. So what I'm going to do is turn. Should I turn the sound off? Let's leave it on. Let's leave it on. So this is from a documentary I am working on, and I don't want to spoil too much. But here we can see the Allies pushing through. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is on screen. And here we go. So this explains it way better for the people watching now. Here you have the Netherlands, the south of the Netherlands against the Belgian border. We have the major cities. I've only did these cities that are important. I animated only these cities that are important during Operation Market Garden. But the white line on the sides here, this is the Siegfried line. So the airborne troops, they would use them to capture the bridges. Why? Because, the element of surprise. If you fly over with paratroopers randomly over bridges, drop the paratroopers close enough to the bridges so they can capture and hold it, and then fend off any German attacks to recapture the bridge, then the Germans could not blow up the bridge, and then you could use it to cross the river. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, that if bridges blew up and yada, yada, yada. But that's why the airborne troops were very important during this operation. And the Netherlands is consisted of a lot of rivers. As well as you can see here on the screen, these are just a few rivers that I drew out, the important ones that they used for Market Garden, where they needed to capture the bridges on. So then the airborne troops would land 3 airborne divisions. So you had the 1st British Airborne Division, also supported by the 1st Polish Airborne Brigade. Then you had the 82nd Airborne Division, American 82nd Airborne Division, that would land near Nijmegen and capture the bridge at Nijmegen. And the British would capture the bridge at Arnhem. And then you would have the 101st Airborne Division that would land north of Eindhoven and capture the bridges at Veghel and at Somme and Best. Best, eventually, they didn't really use that bridge. They only used Son, but that's an extra bridge. Didn't put it on the map. But yeah, there were even more bridges. But then the podcast is going to be very, very long. So now you have the airborne element, which the airborne element is called market. So you have operation, market, garden. So market was the airborne element. Now we're going to garden. So what is garden element? The garden element were the ground forces that were on the Belgian-Dutch border that had to move up, if we do it like this, who had to move up north from the Belgian border near Lommel all the way up to Arnhem. And that road was a 60-mile long road, which is around 100 kilometers, narrow, which they had to push with over 50,000 men and 22,000 vehicles. And the British 30th Corps would get that task. So just imagine, more than 50,000 men and 22,000 vehicles had to go from the Belgian border all the way up one narrow, I say narrow, road all the way up to Arnhem. And then you think, okay, yeah, towards Arnhem, that could happen, right? But they had to do it in 3 days, because when you drop paratroopers on bridges and they need to held off the Germans, paratroopers are lightly armored, right? They have maybe like some Piat or bazookas. They don't have tanks, and they don't have big anti-tank stuff to knock out German tanks with. They have like small things that they can carry into planes, and then with gliders as well, and then fight the German armor. So the 30th Corps had to then go within 3 days all the way up to Arnhem. So that was also a very, very big problem that we're going to talk about in the future. But here you can see it again. 30th Corps would go up, and the airborne divisions would already be at the bridges, and then they would take Arnhem. Now I'll show you the true reason why Eisenhower gave the green light. So here I'm going to show you, you see the 1st Airborne Division in the north over here, and the Polish brigade supporting the British on the south of the Rhine River. Then you have the 82nd Airborne Division Nijmegen and the 101st at Eindhoven. So here you can sort of see the troop numbers that I put in my documentary. So you can see the gliders, how many gliders each division, airborne division had, with the anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, with the headquarters in there. All the equipment, supplies that the jeeps, motorized vehicles, bigger machine guns that they all needed to flew in by glider. So that's why every airborne division already also had gliders with them. So you can see the amount of paratroopers and the amount of gliders. Almost 7,000 for the 101st Airborne, more than 7,000 for the 82nd Airborne, and around 10,000 men, paratroopers from the 1st Airborne Division, and another 1,000 Polish of the Polish Brigade. So that's a lot of forces. So when we say paratroopers and airborne, we always also calculate in the gliders. Now, if we go further, why in the hell would Eisenhower say yes to this, bold, very risky plan, right? You're dropping a lot of men behind enemy lines. If 30th Corps cannot push through, the men are stuck there behind enemy lines, and they probably will be all captured and they will die, right? Or, be prisoners of war or wounded or They would be casualties of the war. Eisenhower eventually said yes, because if this plan succeeded, like I said before, Christmas 1944, the war could end. They could be first in Berlin, but also cutting off the German 15th Army. So let me check here when I go a little bit further into the documentary. Yes. Boom. Here we are. And boom. So if they would reach Arnhem, and 30th Corps would be there as well, and the British would be 1st Airborne would be relieved at Arnhem. Now what the Allies could do, they could go northwest-ish towards the Zuiderzee. And that is this part, the Zuiderzee, boom. And then completely cut off the German 15th Army, who would sit here in the west of the Netherlands. The only way that the Germans could retreat back was through a big dike that the Dutch built in the northern part of that sea. But it's very narrow. It's a 2-lane road, and that could be easily bombed and harassed by the Allies. So the German 15th Army now would have been stuck, which would mean that because the Allies were still getting their supplies all the way from Normandy, all the way up to the front line. So they had a lot of supply issues all of a sudden because the Germans were retreating pretty fast and pretty far. So you have to supply all those men that are pushing the Germans back, and all of a sudden the supplies cannot catch up with the front lines. So from the harbors, that's the man-made harbors in Normandy, they were still getting supplied from there. So what did the Allies want? They wanted to get Antwerp into their hands for the supplies. They had Antwerp in their hands, but they couldn't get supplies to it. Why? Because of the Schelde estuary. And that is on the south of the Netherlands, and I will show you that here. Boom. So this was the situation in 1944 for the Allies. So we have Antwerp here, where you see my mouse. And if you want to pass ships through this estuary, the Schelde estuary, the Germans are on this island called Walcheren. So they were still here, and you cannot put ships through the estuary all the way up to Antwerp to supply the front line, because the Germans are still here. They could harass the boats, they could fire upon it. It's just too dangerous. You cannot do it. So if they cut off the German 15th Army, and then the Canadians and British who were here, especially the Canadians who were here in the south, they could now, with a cut off German army, they could now easily attack, because that German army cannot reinforce, they could not get supplies through, and they would just be worn out eventually, out of ammunition or yada yada yada. So they could easily capture the island of Walcheren, so they could use the port of Antwerp. So you can see that, the Scheldt estuary, and then you see Antwerp. So this is also a reason that is not talked about a lot, why Eisenhower said yes and gave this operation the green light. After Montgomery was moaning, I wouldn't say moaning, but trying to convince Eisenhower to finally get a operation through and get all the supplies from the front line, because you have to imagine that this operation like this, such an ambitious operation, will need a lot of supplies, a lot of oil, a lot of fuel, a lot of airplanes, a lot of equipment, ammunition, yada yada yada, you name it. And that all needs to come from somewhere. So Patton was on the front lines with his Third Army on the Siegfried Line, and he wanted to push through. He wanted to get all these supplies, and he wanted to push through. And Eisenhower didn't want to do that, because he gave now, not in the beginning, because he gave now Bernard Montgomery the priority on all the logistics. So now Montgomery had all the airplanes, all the fuel, and Patton was really, really angry about that. And I've heard about some stories that Eisenhower and Patton weren't really a fan of each other. So now, Montgomery got it, and then Operation Market Garden got the green light. This was in the back of the mind of Eisenhower's mind, and in his memoirs he wrote about it as well, that this is the reason why he gave the green light. Now you know about Operation Market Garden. Huh? We covered the market, the airborne forces, and we covered Garden, the ground forces. Now we have to talk about, I'm going to skip a little bit through. Now we have to talk about the Germans. Let's talk about the German side, yeah? What happened? Okay, I'm going to remove this. Boom. So the plan was to go and bypass the Siegfried Line by going north into the Netherlands, crossing the river at Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem, which I can show you right now. So here, Eindhoven, Nijmegen, Arnhem. Then cross the Rhine River, bypass the Siegfried Line, going down south again to the Ruhr Valley. And the Ruhr Valley in Germany was the industrial heartland of Germany. So they could take that, but also immediately push up more north to the Netherlands, trap the 15th Army from the Germans, the 15th German Army on the west, in the west of the Netherlands, and immediately push forward without big fortification defenses like the West Wall or the Siegfried Line and push towards Berlin. That would mean that the war would have probably ended around Christmas 1944. And that's where Montgomery wanted to aim for, and also Eisenhower and the Allies. And also be the first in Berlin before the Soviets got there. So they could capture Berlin and then had more negotiations. How do you say that? More. Well, they could negotiate better if they got Berlin. That they had Berlin in their hands instead of the Soviets. So there was a lot of reasons why they did this operation. But how are you going to capture bridges over rivers with tanks in front? The Germans could easily blow them up, right? So during this plan, they used airborne troops. And airborne is very, very handy. That's what the Germans used on Crete as well. For the first time in the war, the Germans used it on Crete, next to the island, next to the country of Greece. So the Germans play also a really, really big part in this operation because, yeah, they are the opposite force. On the 4th of September 1944, Antwerp got liberated, and the Germans in the Netherlands, the Allies were already bordering Belgium and the Dutch border, were already there. The Allies and the Germans were still on the Dutch side, in the Netherlands. And then all of a sudden, the Germans heard about the liberation of Antwerp. Antwerp is very close to the Netherlands. So what happened when the local people in the Netherlands, the Dutch civilians, heard about the liberation of Antwerp in the newspapers and on the radios and yada, yada, yada? Well, they thought that liberation was going to be there in a week or two, and then that the liberation was imminent, and they already started celebrating. So on the 5th of September, which is it is the 5th of September, yes, the Dutch civilians were celebrating that they had won the war and they got liberated, even though they weren't really liberated already. So what happened? The Germans saw that all the civilians were celebrating the liberation, and the Germans sort of panicked. Oh, the Allies are probably around the corner. We need to retreat. We need to retreat back to Germany. This is a complete mess, chaos. The NSB members, which was the Dutch political fascist party, who collaborated with the Germans, they were getting scared. They were leaving their homes, and all the German soldiers was complete chaos, disorder, and they left to go back to Germany. They left their positions. It was just total chaos in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, we call that day on the 5th of September, we call that Dolle Dinsdag, which is in English Mad Tuesday. And the Germans were retreated, and all of a sudden, Walter Model heard about this, right? Hitler knew about it. Walter Model knew about it. The whole German command knew about it, that there was chaos on the Western Front now in the Netherlands. So what did Hitler do? Hitler knows that Walter Model, a field marshal of the German army, is like a frontline savior. If it went bad on the Soviet front line, he would put Walter Model in charge, and he would take care of the situation. Walter Model also has a nickname, Hitler's fireman, or the savior of. I wouldn't say the savior, but yeah, Hitler's fireman was one of his nicknames, because he would always solve the problems in a defensive way. Hitler heard about the chaos in the Netherlands on Mad Tuesday, and he appointed personally Walter Model to be the Oberfeldheber Commandant West, if I say it correctly in German. So be the leader of the Western Defense Force there. So he appointed Walter Model. Walter Model came to the West, saw the immediate chaos. All the German troops were mixed with each other. The Wehrmacht was mixed with SS troops. The Luftwaffe was mixed in there. Home front guard troops were mixed in there. It was just a complete chaotic mess. So the Germans had one big strength, and that was make from a mess and chaos, make something solid and good. Because the Germans were very, very good troops and very, very disciplined. So what Walter Model did, he made certain Kampfgruppen. And Kampfgruppen is like fighting groups. That would mean that Walter Model would appoint in an area which was mixed of Luftwaffe, SS troops, Wehrmacht troops, home guard troops, just all the German forces in a single area. he would pick out the highest ranking guy in that area, maybe like a major or even less. Most of the time they were less, and they like a captain or I don't know, just an high ranking officer. And he would appoint that group mixed of all those soldiers, depending if it was 200 soldiers, sometimes it was 500 soldiers, sometimes 800 or over 1,000. But those groups would now form a Kampfgruppe. That would now be a fighting unit with the officer, the highest ranking officer, as his leader. So now you had like people who were in the SS or in the Luftwaffe and the Wehrmacht now fighting side by side, shoulder to shoulder in one Kampfgruppe, in one fighting group. And they had different units, different Kampfgruppe, that now was easy to send them back to certain positions and put them on the front lines again. It was now way easier for the Germans to do that. So Kampfgruppe is very, very important during Operation Market Garden because the Netherlands was all of a sudden after Mad Tuesday full of it, full of Kampfgruppes. So now, German situation, total chaos. Kampfgruppe rearranged, boom, back on the front lines. Germans, after the Dutch were celebrating, and a day or 2 or 3 later, all of a sudden the Germans were walking back, and they were like, oh, wait. They realized, the war is not over yet. So the civilians went back into their homes and waited for imminent liberation, of course, because, of course, they didn't knew it back then, but the Allies were making significant gains in Europe already. Now, I can go on and on about this with the German position, but I have to skip it on the Germans quickly as well. But after Normandy, the fighting, you just imagine now, Netherlands full of Kampfgruppe, but also after Normandy, the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Division, who fought in Normandy, were beaten pretty badly, and they were laid to rest in Arnhem, which the Allies knew. They did reconnaissance missions, the Allies, before Operation Market Garden, and they saw some photos and pictures of tanks in woods, and they sort of discarded it like, it's probably nothing. But actually, it were 2 SS Panzer divisions, very hard and good fighting soldiers were resting in Arnhem, around Arnhem, which was one of the main objectives of this operation, which is, in hindsight, is very, very weird when you think about it. But I think that the Allies knew it, but Montgomery wanted this plan so much that all of a sudden nothing could stop it anymore. They, in the beginning, said, there were old men and home guard troops who were fighting there, and it would be, that was what Montgomery said to Eisenhower in a convincing. And all of a sudden, during some reconnaissance flights, taking photos of the area, they saw tanks hidden in the forest, and still they didn't cancel the operation. They just went through it. But those 2 Panzer divisions, SS Panzer divisions, played a huge role for the Germans' Operation Market Garden. And it's probably the reason, also one of the bigger reasons, why the Allies lost this battle. We'll go to that further, but I don't want to go ahead of myself very, very far. That's the situation of the Germans. The Germans finally restored order, got back, and now the Allies are going to attack. Now, 17th of September, Sunday, 1944. The skies. Planes are going over into England. The people outside on Sunday church go outside because they see all the planes, the American and British planes, go over their heads, going over the channel towards the Netherlands to drop 3 airborne divisions. Germans had no clue. It was a complete surprise for the Germans. Walter Model, the field marshal, this is a pretty good example of how big of a surprise it was, because Walter Model himself, the field marshal who put the defenses up for the Germans and restored the chaos, now was in a residence or in a hotel in Oosterbeek, and Oosterbeek is literally the town next to Arnhem. And he was staying there, trying to be the commander and the field marshal that he was, and directing the troops, and yada yada yada. So Walter Model is in his hotel, and it's not the Hartenstein Hotel, because his staff was in the Hartenstein Hotel. He was 2 streets further or 3 streets further in Hotel Tafelberg, and that was where he actually slept and had his office. Like A Bridge Too Far, that movie has that wrong. But I'm not going to nitpick here. But Walter Motor was in Oosterbeek, and all of a sudden, all those planes fly over. And he can hear the planes, and they go outside, and they see the parachutes drop on the drop zones on the west side of Oosterbeek. So all the parachute drops, and Walter Motor is standing there, and he's like completely surprised. He's like, wow, would you look at that? Like, what are they going to do here? What is their plan? There's nothing important here in this area. And then he thinks like, wait, I am important. I am an important figure here. Maybe they are coming for me. Walter Motor then escapes Oosterbeek and goes to Elst. No, not Elst, to Lent. Was it Lent? Hold on, let me check. It was Velp. So he went to the northeast of Arnhem, to Velp, and he would hide there while the Germans would fight the British in Oosterbeek and yada yada yada. So it was a total surprise for the Germans. We'll start from the north and then we'll go to the south. So the British land, they needed to capture the Arnhem Bridge. They go through Oosterbeek, fight their way all the way through, and one battalion, which was 2nd Battalion of John Frost, they went through Oosterbeek. They sneaked through the German defenses, and sort of with the element of surprise, they could have sneaked through, and they went to Arnhem Bridge and held the bridge for more than 3 days, I have to say to you. A lot of fighting happened. Only 2nd Battalion went through, and during the fighting days from the 17th of September all the way up until the 21st, 22nd of September, some small units went through Oosterbeek to the Arnhem Bridge and joined with John Frost at the bridge. So in the beginning, around 500 men went to the bridge, and then all of a sudden, around the next couple of days, 250 men joined them, and they were holding off the northern end of the bridge. Then you have the 82nd Airborne. The 82nd Airborne landed on the southeastern side of Nijmegen, near a town of Groesbeek. And JD, my friend, he can pronounce Groesbeek as an American very, very well. He's always like Groesbeek. But yeah, that's a little inside joke. But so they land near Groesbeek, and they have the objective to capture the Nijmegen Bridge, the 82nd Airborne Division. They land there, 505th, 508th, and the 504th. 504th, however, they land on the west end of Nijmegen, and they need to capture multiple bridges over the river Waal, and they have to capture the bridge at Grave, which was the longest bridge back then during in Europe. Yeah, in the whole history. And was, I think, 150 meters, if I am correct. And they needed to capture that bridge. Then we go to the 101st, and 101st land north of Eindhoven, around Son, and they had to capture the Son Bridge and the bridge at Veghel. So they all, for the 1st Airborne Division, it went not as well as they expected, but hey, right? They eventually got to the bridge and they sort of held it. They couldn't reinforce the bridge anymore because the Germans completely cut off the British Airborne. In Nijmegen, the 82nd Airborne Division, they had something, that's a little bit of a topic. So the 82nd Airborne, Lindquist, Roy E. Lindquist, he was the commander of the 505th and of the 508th. Why am I having this wrong? Yeah, so Roy E. Lindquist, he was with the 508th, and he needed to capture the bridge as soon as possible, the main road bridge of Nijmegen. But he didn't. So he got orders to land with his paratroopers, then secure the drop zone, and then go to the bridge. That was what Gavin told him, the general of the 82nd Airborne Division. Lindquist sort of interpreted as, okay, I have to land, I have to secure the whole drop zone, have a nice solid perimeter, and then go to the bridge and capture the bridge, which wasn't the case. He needed to land, secure, go, like within the same hour, because the element of surprise is very, very important. So that was a big problem because the bridge at Nijmegen, the road bridge, wasn't captured in the first hours during the surprise. And what did the Germans do? They defended the bridge very, very well for the next couple of days. But we're gonna get back to that as well a little bit later. So that was a big thing that happened in Nijmegen, which was immediately already a big error. Then we go to the 101st Airborne Division. 101st Airborne Division land near Eindhoven. They go to Son. They go to Veghel. Veghel went pretty well. There was a lot of fighting, of course, but they captured the bridges pretty easy. Then they went to Son, and while the Allies were running towards the bridge at Son, very important bridge because that was one of the first bridges that they had to capture to let 30th Corps drive over, so that 30th Corps could link up then with the 82nd Airborne Division. So they were running towards the bridge, gun in the hand, running towards it, and around 50 meters before they reached the bridge, boom, in their face, the whole bridge blew up. So the 101st landed, all that effort, went to the bridge, and then in front of their faces, literally, the Germans blew it up. And they were like, shit, what now? Yeah, so luckily, what the 30th Corps had, of course, they were prepared for it. If the Germans would blow up a bridge like that, they had bridging equipment with them. So before I talk about that, 30th Corps now in the south opened up with a lot of artillery to go and start their march from the south all the way up to the north, drive with all those vehicles, and link up with the 101st Airborne Division first with the 101st Airborne Division. Bridge got blown up. They had luckily bridging equipment with them, around 5,000 sappers and 2,000 vehicles of bridging equipment. And so what happens when you blow up a bridge? You need to be in 3 days to Arnhem, to the British, that they were there at the Arnhem Bridge. You only have 3 days to do it. And all of a sudden, the first bridge that you need to cross gets blown up. What did you do? What do you do? Yeah, you rebuild a bridge, right? You make your own bridge, like a Bailey Bridge. But that means that there's going to be delays. So 30th Corps starts off their advance with a lot of artillery, like I just briefly mentioned. They get pushed back a lot. What happens in a column with tanks, if they drive forward and the front tanks gets knocked out and is blocking the way for the tanks at the back, you need to push that tank off the road and then you can continue the column. Whole traffic jams, yada, yada, yada. Well, if you drive to work and there's a traffic jam, you know how annoying it is. Just imagine the frustration when you have to get 60 miles further to the British who are holding a bridge in Arnhem and save their lives, literally. Just imagine the frustration you have when you are delayed or annoyed in a traffic jam. But finally, after some fighting with the British, with the Germans on the south of the Eindhoven, they finally reach Eindhoven. Eindhoven get liberated, and then they go to Son Bridge. 30th Corps arrives. There's no bridge. Now the 101st and the engineers of 30th Corps are now having the task of rebuilding the bridge. So the engineers get on rebuilding the bridge, and already there's a 36-hour delay after the bridge gets built. Once they arrive at the bridge, before they built the bridge, there was already a 12-hour delay because the Germans, held back 30th Corps already at the south of Eindhoven, and that's already some delays are happening before even 30th Corps had to go to the 82nd Airborne Division in Nijmegen. So this is already going very, very well with the operation. Then 30th Corps, after building the bridge, drives up through Veghel, through St. Uderode, drives all the way up to Grave. Grave, that bridge, the longest bridge in Europe back then. The Americans' 82nd Airborne Division, especially E Company of the 504th, did fantastic work. E Company, 2nd Battalion, they did fantastic work. They got the bridge in no time, probably the quickest that the bridge got captured during Operation Market Garden, and with even some very, very heavy, fierce fighting. But those E Company of the 504, they are elite troops. They fought in NCO, they fought in Africa, they fought in Italy, they fought in Normandy, they fought, you could say almost everywhere. And they were elite troops, so that's why they got the task of that important bridge of Grave. If they couldn't capture that bridge and that bridge was blown up or was still in German hands, then I don't know what would have happened with building a bridge over the Maas River, because that's a really fast flowing river that you could not easily build a Bailey bridge on. They got to Graven, and finally 30th Corps could link up now with the 82nd Airborne Division. So they linked up with the 82nd Airborne Division at Graven, then went to Heumen. Heumen was another bridge on the Maaswal Canal, which I can go into very much detail, but then this podcast would last for hours and hours. But they eventually, 30th Corps made it to Nijmegen. 30th Corps comes up to Nijmegen. What happens in Nijmegen? There is no bridge. They don't have the bridge in their hands. There is a bridge, but it's still in German hands. So now 30th Corps, together with the 82nd Airborne Division, need to recapture the road, or to capture the bridge so they could cross it and get to the boys at Arnhem. Now, in the beginning, like I said to you, they only had 3 days to do that, which would mean that the Airborne Division in Arnhem and the Airborne Division in Nijmegen and Eindhoven had around 3 days to hold the bridge, which was like the maximum to hold the bridge with your ammunition, your supplies, because you cannot carry weeks of food on your body and in the gliders to hold the bridge for like a whole week or two. You can only do that for like a few days, and they had 3, which was maximum, and they eventually held it for 5 days. The British, which like the British are made of, I don't know, they are made of a different stone than us normal people, as we say it like that. The British are some badass people. So where was it left off? Yeah, so the British came into Nijmegen, and it was already the 3rd/4th day. So what happens? You need to capture the bridge again. The Germans now, after 3 days, had a really, really strong, solid defensive position in and around Nijmegen. So there was a lot of fierce urban fighting in Nijmegen, like absolutely mental. A lot of people died. A lot of Dutch resistance died as well, and helped the Americans and the British with fighting the Germans with reconnaissance patrols, being the guide, where to go, where the Germans were, German positions, and yada yada yada, all that type of stuff. But now the Americans need to capture that bridge, because the British, remember, are in Arnhem, surrounded by a lot of German troops, and are still holding the bridge. So the Americans come up with an idea. Brian Horrocks, the general of 30th Corps, comes together with Gavin, together with Lindquist, and together with Browning. Because Browning, the general of, sort of the on the ground leader of the operation, and General Browning also the leader of the 1st Airborne Division, was dropped with the 82nd Airborne at Groesbeek with his headquarters. I sort of forgot to tell you that, but he was around Nijmegen. So all those guys, Brian Horrocks, Browning, Lindquist, Gavin, they all come together, and they needed to come up with a plan to capture the road bridge in Nijmegen. And here he goes. Okay, let's do another ambitious plan. Let's get boats, cross the river with boats on the western side of the bridge. We've sent a whole company on boats over the river and capture the bridge on both sides. Because, what is the best way to capture a bridge? It's coming from both sides. Very, very ambitious and insane plan. And there was a guy, Julian Cook, who was crazy enough to do that little operation, which is called the wall crossing with the boats. So they got around 200 boats. They got from all the way from the back of the line. They were still in Belgium on the 4th day. They got it all the way to the Nijmegen front line. That took also around a full day. And then finally they got the boats and needed to cross the Waal River. So they crossed the Waal River with boats on the other end, and to get on the northern side of the bridge, go east, and then get to the northern side of the bridge. Fight their way east, get on the northern side of the bridge. Then with infantry from the north, fight towards the middle of the bridge, and then from the south with tanks, drive up the road bridge. So you have it from 2 sides. It worked. Miraculously, it worked. A lot of casualties of the guys the company who went through on the boats and crossed the river, but they eventually managed it. Now what you have is from the Irish Guards, tanks going up, 4 tanks going up the road bridge on the south side and the infantry on the north end side. Now, finally, after all those days, which should have happened on the first day, and after all those delays, they captured the bridge at Nijmegen. It was now in Allied hands, which would mean they could go and fight towards Arnhem and then relieve the British at Arnhem. Right? You would think? No. The tanks, a few tanks only made it through. Tanks were there, and the Americans was like, yeah, now let's go and rescue the bridge. Let's go. And then the British tanks were like, yeah, sorry, we can't go. We A, don't have infantry support. B, we don't have enough men. And C, we have orders to capture this bridge and then wait, for the rest to catch up, because their infantry and boys were still fighting the Germans in Nijmegen. So they couldn't go. Americans were pissed off because, they just lost a lot of men for this daring operation to capture this bridge to get as quickly as possible to Arnhem. But in the meantime, while this was happening, the British had already lost the bridge at Arnhem. After 5 days, after fighting literally until the last bullet and the last man at the bridge, John Frost finally surrendered. And the last radio message in around the bridge of Arnhem from the British said, "God save the king." Out of ammunition, "God save the king." That was the last radio message that was heard from the British who were stuck at the bridge. Because you have to imagine, most of the British forces, more than 9,000 forces, were on the western side around Oosterbeek, still fighting the Germans because they couldn't push through the German blockade, where John Frost was behind the blockade on the bridges with around 750 men, and they couldn't go through, even though with a lot of attempts, and the Germans were getting stronger and stronger. And that is the SS Panzer divisions, right? With a lot of tanks, with very, very well-trained men. And the British were no force up against them with their lightly armored infantry. And I wouldn't say armored, like with a few Piats and a few anti-tank guns. They couldn't fight like a whole SS Panzer division. Well, the Panzer divisions were very under strength, but still way too much for a British like a paratrooper division, which is like very, very lightly weaponized and lightly armored. So now the British already gave up, and the Allies were now fighting still in Nijmegen, and it was a complete disaster. The British at the bridge, John Frost was captured. Boom, done. He was captured, was held prisoner. But the British were still fighting in the pocket of Oosterbeek. The British were, how do I say that? Pushed back from the drop zones. The British had no drop zones anymore in their hands. The second lift and the third lift with the Polish as well sort of happened eventually, but then got pushed back. But not all the Polish, just a little bit of the Polish were dropped on the south of the bridge. But I am going back and forth now. You're probably very, very confused because it's just so much info that I want to narrow in just a few minutes, or which is not going to work. But now the British are stuck in Oosterbeek in like a pocket, and you cannot go and easily break out of a pocket and then go to the bridge and go. You're literally stuck. So they needed to get those people out of there. Now, finally, after fighting in Nijmegen and the British were still stuck in that pocket, the Americans and the British in Nijmegen finally pushed through over the bridge into what we call the island, the Betuwe. And I can maybe show you with a picture a little bit better. Okay, let's use Google Map a little bit, because Google Maps, this is a little bit better. Sorry for all the pins and stuff, because that's for my documentary, which you cannot really see. But they crossed this area, the 82nd Airborne, crossed this area here with the boats, and then captured the railway bridge and the road bridge. But now, what happened? This is what we called in the Netherlands the Betuwe. So you see the north, the Rhine River, that river, and then you see the Wal River down here. So this is what we call the island. The Betuwe is what we call the Netherlands, the Americans, and the British would call it the island. So let me put this a little bit better. There we go. So what now? So the British are stuck here in Oosterbeek. This is Oosterbeek. And here you can see the island. Finally, the Americans and the British would push into this island, into the Betuwe. And they would have positions all around this area here. Now they have to come up with an idea because the John Frost, he lost the bridge here, and all the British were still stuck here in Oosterbeek in sort of a pocket in what's the Germans called Hexenkessel, which is like a witch cauldron. And now they needed to think of something to reinforce the British who were in Oosterbeek. So what they did, they got the Polish. The Polish landed here around Driel. Oh, that is my alarm clock. They would land the Polish, they would land it around here in Driel and then reinforced by boats, the same boats that were used during the wall crossing, by the way. They would use those boats to cross into the Oosterbeek pocket and then help the British fight. Polish would land. A lot of Polish people, Polish soldier went across the river to support the British during the days, during after they landed, and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. There was only one option left because the pocket was getting narrower and narrower, and the pressure of the Germans with snipers and tanks and yada yada was getting higher and higher, and there was only one option left, and that is we need to retreat. We need to retreat back over the river. That was the only option. The only defensive form that they had behind them was a river, and they had to cross a river. So they came up then with the plan. Okay, boys, we need to get our men back from this hellhole, which was Oosterbeek back then in 1944. So all of a sudden, the Polish and engineers and the guys from the British 30th Corps would help the other British soldiers who were in Oosterbeek, would help them cross back onto Allied territory, which was now Allied territory, and which was called Operation Pegasus. So the British would retreat here back on the lower Rhine, which is called it's called the Lower Rhine actually, and then with Operation Pegasus back into safety into the Allies' hands. And then around 2,000 people. No, let me say it like this: 10,000 British paratroopers went in, dropped on the drop zones here, went in, fought a lot in this area of Oosterbeek and Hilsum and Arnhem. 10,000 soldiers went in, and only 2,000 soldiers on this area here came back on Allied soil, which is almost a casualty rate of almost 80%, which is insane. You could say like 70 to 75% casualty rates, which is like missing in action, wounded, killed in action, or a POW. So let me include that as well. 10,000 men, only 2,000 returned. A little bit more than 2,000, but which is really, really insane. And then boom, the operation was done. A lot of other things happened during this operation, but I could go on and on and on, and probably most of you clicked away. I'm surprised if somebody else is still listening to this crap of me just ranting about Market Garden and going all over the place. But now the operation was done, right? It's failed. Germans won. Germans used it as propaganda as well back into Germany with a lot of footage and photos and like, hey, we beat the Allies here. They did an ambitious operation and they couldn't stand the mighty German army. So that's why also reason why a lot of photos and footage is there of Operation Market Garden, because a lot of it got publicized by the Germans as well. So yeah, what now to the topic? What went wrong? A lot went wrong, in my opinion. We can go all the way from the beginning to actually the optimism and decision making on the operation to the logistics and the start, because yeah, they only had 7 days. 7 days to prepare this operation. On the 11th of September, no, on the 10th of September, 9th of September, 10th, he got the green light. Montgomery got the green light to push through with this operation. And on the 17th of September, a week later, they did it. So the lack of the logistics is also something. And we can go all the way forward to faults that the British made, the faults that the Americans made, and yada, yada, yada. Let's just dissect it a little bit. And that's also why I have a little bit of my notes with it on why it went wrong. And probably I can memorize a lot as well of why it went wrong. So the plan itself, too fragile, too optimistic, in my opinion. You have to cross a lot of rivers. You have to capture around 15 bridges. And of those 15 bridges, 1, 2, 3, 4, around 6, 7 bridges needed to actually be captured to get people across. They needed to capture more bridges just to make sure that they had an actual crossing. But on the Maaswal Canal, which is, I'll get Google Earth back again. So the Maaswal Canal, that is this little river over here. And all these bridges were blown up and not captured, except for Heumen, the Heumen Bridge, which was back then over here. Maybe I can show you it pretty quickly as well. The Heumen Bridge. There we go. This was the Heumen Bridge back then. Okay, I'm getting distracted. Sorry. Oh, I need to go back. So that plan to capture all those bridges intact is insane. It's like already insane. And then add to it that 30th Corps had to go from the Belgian border 100 kilometers, 60 miles on a narrow road with 50,000 men and 22,000 vehicles, of which tanks in the front and all that, within 3 days, and then go all the way up and then reach the British at Arnhem is just insane. Like, you could, I think every military strategist, I don't know how to say it, but could think of that this is very, very, very ambitious. If it all works out, happy days, but a high percentage of chance that it didn't work out, and eventually it didn't. They got all the bridges. They got into the island, the Betuwe, and to the south of the bridge of Arnhem. But yeah, Arnhem was literally a bridge too far, as people would say it. And as I think they quoted Montgomery on that, or it was Browning or Urquhart. I don't know. Don't quote me on that now. And that quote was also a little bit loose. It's rumored that somebody said it, but not actually that somebody did say it. It's not 100% confirmed. But yeah, so it was not really the best plan, the most waterproof plan. Because if one thing went wrong, then other things wrong. This was a plan that everything needed to go right. And yeah, that's something that didn't happen. And also, there was no really serious backup plan for when Arnhem failed. So there was not really okay, if this goes wrong, we do this. If that goes wrong, we do this. No, it was everything has to go right. And if one thing goes wrong, then the whole operation failed. So I don't know what exactly they were thinking. Maybe some of you guys can educate me on stuff as well. Also, educate me if I got something wrong with this, because I'm doing it, out of my head. So, yeah. Over optimism is also something that I said, because the Allied commanders believed that Germany was not capable of such a defense anymore, really. They thought that Germany was already collapsed, and that, of course, they took the Germans serious still, right? Because, Germany fighting on their homeland or close to their homeland, they would defend it literally with their lives. So they were taking it seriously. But they thought that only older men and home guards and children were around the area of Arnhem and Nijmegen and fighting there. But it wasn't. It was two SS Panzer Division, which was also a mistake that they made, not having their intel completely right. And if they had their intel completely right, that they saw the tanks with that reconnaissance patrol, then they still went through with the operation, which is also a very, very big mistake then. Because in my opinion, if you put paratroopers to a Panzer division, which like a hardened veteran Panzer division, then yeah, that would not really work. So, although the paratroopers are also elite forces, but you cannot fight with paratroopers against tanks. That is just not going to work. Not in the long run, to be fair. Also, the speed. So the delays. We got the first delays of 30th Corps getting held back on the border here between Eindhoven and because just imagine those Kampfgroepen that I talked about in the beginning. They were all around this area, all around the south of Valkenswaard. Let me say it like that, and they were bordering the Allies. So what did the Allies do? They shot a lot of artillery first, and then went through on this narrow road here. Maybe I can show you a picture of the road. This road is of course new, but you can see, yeah, now it's a little bit of a 2-lane. In the beginning as well, back then it was sort of a 2-lane. You could just bypass with 2 tanks each other, but the more you went down the road, the narrower it went, and all of a sudden you could only drive with 1 tank. But yeah, so the German resistance, the delays. So the first delays here were already a big problem. Then when they went up to Eindhoven, and then here at the bridge at Son, this bridge got blown up. Delay. Needed to build a Bailey bridge. Here, I can show you the bridge as well, which is a little bit fun to see. So this bridge, it's very wide now, it's not old. But this one was also, yeah, delays. Then they go up all the way to St. Uderode, then to Veghel. This all went pretty well. Uden. Then they came up to Graven. This was a perfect operation. This was executed perfectly by John S. Thompson and his men. 30th Corps came up. There were already delays, like I said. They then went through Overasselt, through Heumen, over the bridge, which was luckily still intact. If not, they would have been pretty screwed and had to build up another Bailey bridge. But they went through and then went up north through Malden and then linked up with the 82nd Airborne here in Nijmegen. Then, in my opinion, which is the big mistake, but before I say that, also, then we'll move on from 30th Corps. The narrow, long road, also a big mistake. 60 miles, small. You cannot fit a lot of men on there. Also, very, very big mistake. But here, in my opinion, the biggest mistake of them all. It happened literally here. Groesbeek, you have the drop zones here around. And of the drop zone of the 508th around here. They should have immediately dropped and went to the bridge, which they didn't. They secured the area, the drop zones first, and then they went to the bridge. Way, way too late. Only what they did is a small patrol they would send to the bridge to scout ahead, but they were on the bridge. They were close to the bridge. Only a few men actually were. And yeah, what are you going to do with a few men? You cannot hold the bridge with a few men. They retreated back, and then all of a sudden, whole companies went. Way, way, way too late. It was a misunderstanding, what I read about and stuff, to put the blame completely on Gavin. Because, yeah, you can put the blame on Lindquist, but Lindquist is not the highest commander of the 82nd. That is Gavin. It's Gavin's responsibility. So, to put the blame completely on Gavin, is it fair? Is it not fair? I don't know. But in my opinion, if they had the bridge on the 3rd day, they had already the bridge, and 30th Corps came up into Nijmegen on the 3rd day, then the whole wall crossing wouldn't have to happen. They could cross the bridge with all their tanks and all their vehicles and infantry equipment. And then on the 4th day, while the British were still in hands of the Arnhem Bridge, they could have, even though a lot of things went wrong, they could have relieved the British here at the bridge. But because Nijmegen was not in the hand of the Allies, they couldn't help the British. So, in my opinion, that is the biggest mistake that happened. Why Operation Markengarden failed, because Nijmegen was still in German hands and a lot of fighting was happening there. Also, on the British side, also a lot of mistakes as well on why the British couldn't get, like thousands of men towards the bridge. Because that is also something. If they had maybe more men at the bridge, they could have a bigger perimeter around the bridge. Maybe also have the south side of the bridge, because you have to know that the British, John Foss and his 750 men, were around this area, 25 houses, I think, 23, 25 houses that they occupied on only the northern side of the bridge. And what did we talk about? To capture a bridge, you have to get both sides of the bridge itself. Now, at the British side, also a lot of things went wrong. If we go here on the main objective, of the British, and we go all the way up to the, let me check, to the drop zone of the British. Let me do the furthers. Let me measure the distance. So the distance is almost 12 kilometers, which is around 7 to 8 miles. Yeah, around 7 miles. 6 to 7 miles. 6 miles is 10 kilometers. That is a long way to be dropped away from a surprise attack with paratroopers to a bridge, right? Like 12 kilometers, that's just way, way, way too far. Why they dropped too far, which was the mistake. The mistake was that they dropped way, way too far for the British. They had to walk all the way those 12 kilometers, 6, 7 miles, to the bridge in Arnhem. First, they wanted to drop here on this area south of the bridge, but because here in this area of Arnhem there is some flak, anti-aircraft guns, which is not, of course, the biggest problem here. To drop paratroopers, of course, it is a big problem. But if you have like a few flak anti-aircraft guns, it's not a big problem. But the biggest problem was here, north. Let me check. Where is here? North of Arnhem. This airfield. Airfield Dalen. And an airfield has a lot of flak and a lot of anti-aircraft guns. So, they couldn't drop here because the Air Force didn't want... and I forgot his name. What's his name? The guy, the leader of the Air Force. Hold on. Give me a second. Okay, I remember now. It was Brereton. He was the Allied... Okay, I have to say it correctly. The Allied Airborne Army. He was there the leader of. Also the... so he eventually decided together with the Air Force that, hey, we cannot lose a single aircraft to this operation. And we cannot risk it to fly over the airport of Dalen or close to it and then get absolutely hammered by flak and all that stuff. That's just not going to happen. So then they decided to get all this flat, this flat area here. Let me check it like that. So here you can see all these flat fields. They eventually decided to use this as the drop zones for the British Airborne, which is, like I said, very, very far. It was way too far. So to get eventually to the bridge. And just imagine, you have to walk. All of a sudden, when the Germans cut this off, you have to push through and you cannot get through. Then you're stuck here, right? You're stuck here. They still tried to push through, didn't work. They have to secure the drop zones as well. They got attacked as well by Germans from all sides, because there were Germans also here on the west. There were Germans in the north at Apeldoorn that got sent down. You know, there was a lot of Kampfgruppe, back to that Kampfgruppe again, and German units that were attacking from all sides. And the British all of a sudden got smaller and smaller and smaller, and they lost the landing zones and the drop zones, and then they retreated back to Oosterbeek. And then in Oosterbeek, the cauldron and the pocket went smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And all of a sudden, you have to retreat. And the boys in Arnhem were lost. Had no radio contact anymore. And because they were so far ahead and the Germans blocked off pretty quickly, because Sepp Kraft was in that area of Oosterbeek here when he saw it, and he put a big blockade with his units. Kampfgruppe Kraft, Sepp Kraft, he was the highest officer in that area. And with his Kampfgruppe, he put like a Sperrline, that's what the Germans called it, like a defensive line, improvised quick defensive line. When he saw the planes and the parachute dropping, he immediately put down a defensive line, and the Allies couldn't push through that. John Frost, with his 2nd Battalion, quickly slipped underneath it before the line was completely closed until the Rhine. So you can see that here. It was before, and he just quickly slipped through the gaps into towards the Arnhem Bridge. But yeah, for drop zones far away was a big problem. Also, the radios didn't work of the British. So the British radios that they used here as well, were used in Africa. And Africa, it's all flat, desert, sand. If you put a radio signal that can easily go way further because it's straight and nothing's blocking the radio signal because, it's all flat and desert, radio signal just come through from one radio to the other. But in the Netherlands, if you drop down, and you saw all the wood and all the forest and stuff and the houses, if you drop down and the houses are like this, standing upright, and you're down here and you want to send a radio message, houses are blocking it. It can go through a few houses and a few trees. Then all of a sudden, the signal gets worse and worse, and you cannot reach the other radio, who is maybe a few kilometers away. So radios were also at fault. The British at the bridge could not communicate with the British in Oosterbeek and the British at the drop zone. So they could not communicate what was going on. So a lot of decisions there were not made, that maybe if they went with a big force, they could break the spare line of Sepp Kraft and the other German forces that eventually went in the 9th SS Panzer Division, that eventually went and had defensive positions up there. Maybe they could have broken through. Yeah, we just don't know. We just don't know. Also, that mistake is, the Germans were there, SS Panzer Division, the intelligence and stuff. Also, what did we forget to say? The air supplies, the resupplies, yes, of course. Also, a lot of resupplies that they did with the British here in Arnhem to keep them fighting. I cannot say a complete percentage, but the air supplies drops, they didn't reach the British, because once the air supply drops were dropped down, most of the areas and the drop zones were now in German hands. And because of the lack of radio communication and communication with the home front, they did not knew that the British had already lost that ground. So most of the resupply and logistic supplies and ammunition and food fell into the German hands. And there's also, which I will show you, which we will end up on. There's an audio fragment as well, an audio snippet of a BBC reporter who was in Oosterbeek, and you can hear the fighting in the background as well. It's absolutely insane, and you can hear the planes from an air supply drop, fly over him, and then miss dropping, and him reacting and responding to that miss drop. So yeah, that's also what failed miserably. So they couldn't get reinforced. Yeah, what else? There's just so much. I cannot think of it out of my head now, but there were so much things that went wrong, from the planning to the actual execution to the delays to it was just, when you think about it in hindsight, it was pretty chaotic. Pretty chaotic. Let me quickly say the consequences and why it matters before we do the audio recording. We'll just I've been talking for a long time already, and you're probably, for the people who are still watching, which I will be surprised of if people are actually watching still, the consequences and why it really matters, right? Because this operation failed to achieve its goal, and it had a lot of heavy Allied casualties, especially for the British, like a lot of casualties. The Netherlands did why this operation matters, and still as well, also for the Netherlands, because big part of the Netherlands was still occupied by the Germans, and the Germans, which I showed you in the beginning with, let me check, this one here, The German 15th Army was not cut off. They were not cut off. So this corridor, open corridor, does not exist. Or all the way towards Arnhem. Literally, the Germans could resupply still, could still move between the Netherlands, yada, yada, yada. And there was no worries for the Germans around this area. They held off. They have like a huge river that they were holding the Allies back on. It would take a lot of effort for the Allies to make a bridge or capture a bridge over the river with a lot of casualties. The Germans were reinforcing a lot. They knew now that the Allies wanted to cross the rivers and yada yada. Now that river was a front line. So almost impossible to cross. And it's getting very, very dark in here as well. Now, let me turn on the light. Yeah, that sort of works a bit. So the German 15th Army was still there. So yeah, the Netherlands was still occupied. People in the west, in Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, all those bigger cities. And in the north, even my town where I live now, I live a little bit more in the middle/north, an hour away of Arnhem. We were still occupied. And it was September. And maybe you've heard of it, or maybe you didn't heard of it. In December and the winter of 1944 to 1945 was brutal for the Netherlands. Brutal. It's literally called in the Netherlands the Hunger Winter. Why is it called the Hunger Winter? The Hunger Winter. It's because the Germans now needed all the supplies for their army, right? They were losing on the Eastern Front. They were losing on the Western Front. They need all the supplies, all the food, all the bicycles, all the rubber, everything that they already took a lot of, now needed it all. And what happened? They took a lot of food and stuff and wood and all that stuff from the Dutch civilians, and which would mean that the Dutch civilians had no food during the winter, and especially in the west, because in the north and in the middle part and the northern part, we had a lot of farms in this area. So the farmers would still farm, sneak away food, and still grow crops and give it to people around. And here it wasn't that bad as it was in the western side of the Netherlands, here where this little icon is. And I will go back to Google Maps. Let me check. Here, yeah. So there was a lot of hunger, and a lot of people starved in the Netherlands from hunger. And if Market Garden probably worked, then those people would not have died, and the Netherlands would be liberated way sooner, and the Hunger Winter would not even exist in our history books. And for us Dutch people, the Hunger Winter is pretty deeply rooted in us, because at schools we get taught about it a lot. And the farmers, the Netherlands, after the Second World War, never ever wanted the Hunger's Winter again. So what they did, they subsidized a lot of the farmers. They boosted the farming community and agriculture in the Netherlands, invested a lot in it to never have our own people starve again. Because as the Netherlands, we are a rich country, and we had people who starved in our rich country, which should not happen. And so it's that deeply rooted in it. Now, I'm not going to talk about into deep politics, but now they are trying to remove farmers again with their farmland, but that's a different topic. I'm not going to discuss that on here. But yeah, the Netherlands really, really had a deep cut after Market Garden in our history, because we were still largely occupied, most of the Netherlands. Also, the war didn't end in 1944 now, which was the plan on Christmas. No, it went through to beginning/mid 1945, which, a lot of casualties happened again. Now they the Allies diverted, and now broke through this area here near Aachen and the Siegfried Line, and now pushed through to Keulen, Cologne, which is for you guys Cologne, and now push into Germany. And the Soviets were pushing way, way harder through Poland, and we're almost already, way closer, let me say that, way closer to Berlin than the Americans eventually were, and the British, or let me say the Allies. So the Also, after this operation, the Allies became way more cautious with their with their operations, because a failure like that, you don't want that to happen again, especially when you lose 8,000 British soldiers from one division that immediately doesn't exist anymore after such a big loss. So then history happened, and now we are in this area time, and now we historians and amateur historians and professional historians are now, of course, debating what went wrong, why it went wrong, how could have happened, how could have it been done in this way, how could have been done in that way, what are the numbers on this, what are the numbers on that, did did Montgomery actually said, was it a bridge too far, did it not, was it Kevin's fault, yada 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 yada. It stays a topic that is probably will be discussed forever, because we'll never have the full answers. We'll never agree upon the same thing with all the people. People have different perspectives, and in my opinion, this is also one of the reasons why Market Garden is such a important but also fun to learn about operation, and not fun in the way, you know what I mean? We got people killed, yada yada yada. But interesting. Let me say it like that. Interesting. One of the most interesting operations for me, also because it happens close to my home and in my country. It's just, I don't know. It is very. I removed myself accidentally. It is just very very interesting. This whole operation, and there's way more to learn about it. I'm still busy on a documentary that I've been have laid off for a few months now, which I am going to continue on it as well in the future. But it's just so much work. But a good question is: did ambition outweigh realism? We'll never know, right? But I do know one thing for sure: the men who fought during this operation and were there during Operation Market Garden fighting for their lives, they went through it all and they saw it all, and the best thing we could do is remember their story, tell the story to other people, and do a stupid podcast like this, just rambling for more than an hour just about Operation Market Garden. And I don't know how I did, or how if people are still watching this, but it is still something that is being discussed. I probably missed a lot of stuff. I could go on and on and on talking about the specifics of what happened at the bridge with the Germans counterattacking, yada yada yada. But I can go on and on and on and on and on, but we're not going to do that. We are going to end with something that I wanted to show you guys, because this is very, very insane that we have this type of recording. So hold on, let me put it in there. This is a video of mine. Let me check. I hope you guys can hear it, and let's watch this together and end the podcast with this. Max is the BBC war correspondent. That is him. This guy was on the ground in Oosterbeek while the resupplies were flying over his head, while fighting was happening in Oosterbeek, and while they were misdropping the supplies.
Just a few minutes ago, the fighter cover showed up, and right behind them came those lovely supply planes that you can hear up above us now. Yesterday and this morning, our supplies came, and they were dropped in the wrong place. The enemy got them. But now these planes have come over, and they've dropped them right dead over us. Everybody is cheering and clapping, and they just can't give vent to their feelings about what a wonderful sight this is. All these bundles and parachuted packages and ammunition are coming down here all around us, through the trees, bouncing on the ground. The men are running out to get them, and you have no idea what this means to us to see this ammunition and this food coming down here where the men can get it. They're such fighters that if they can only get the stuff to fight with, it's a wonderful thing. Shame. It's a shame when they can't get the stuff to fight with. You can hear the kind of flak that those planes are flying through. It's absolutely like hail up there. These enemy guns all around us are just simply hammering at those planes. But so far I haven't seen any of them hit. But the bundles are coming down. The parachutes are coming down. That's all that these men ask.
Wow. Every time I hear that, I'm like, wow, that's actually fighting you hear of Operation Market Garden in the background. And you hear the airplanes coming over, and you hear the flak shooting the airplanes and bursting and men fighting. And oh man, it's insane. It's insane. Operation Market Garden, please, if you ever visit the Netherlands, learn about Operation Market Garden. Even contact me. We have a tour company with Trails of History. Contact me. We do private tours. We do ticketed tours as well. We have a ticketed tour coming up in April on Market Garden, where we go to Arnhem. We go to the places where this was recorded, where those guys were sitting. We go to the drop zones, the old church, the last pocket, the bridge at Arnhem, Nijmegen. We're going to Graven. You know, we're going to all those places where this actually happened, to the Wall crossing where they crossed with the boats, to the drop zones of the 82nd. It's, hit me up, message me, buy a ticket, whatever. I know it's maybe a shameless plug now, but you have to learn about this operation, in my opinion, especially if you're interested in history. You can't go wrong with Operation Market Garden, 100%. So, thank you guys for watching. This is probably a long episode. I know. I've been talking, and I could probably do way more talking than I did today, especially about Market Garden. I didn't even went into details, in my opinion. Maybe I said some, but there's just so much still to talk about, and I did that briefly overview of Market Garden itself. But yeah, we should, if you like it and you still stuck around, let me know as well in the comments, or hit me up, send me a message if you're still listening to it. And if you want me to do some rambling, talking about stuff about history on my own, or with Sean together about random operations topics, or even more Operation Market Garden, let me know, and then I'll I will do it. If that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, everybody, thank you for watching this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next episode then. Yeah. Salute.